back. It is Evil Inkarnate, and I'm your host, Benjamin Osgood. We're going to move away from the world maps today, and we're going to go down into the city of Marith. We're going to talk about castles. Castles have been an essential part of high fantasy and cinema. Going from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter, they've become an essential symbol of stability. Even cinema companies like Disney to the military, Army Corps of Engineers uses them as a symbol. The thing that we want to really focus on, though, is the historical significance of castles. There are three main reasons you're going to have a castle if you're really going to look at history, and I'm just going to very dryly simplify it. Number one, you're going to build a castle to deny any kind of opposition to a particular area from an outside force. I.e., hey, I don't want you in here to take this resource or to take over this area, so I'm going to put this big structure here, and it could be a wooden castle on top of a hill with a moat. And that's going to be your basic motte and bailey. It's a very rudimentary fort. The Romans did it, the British did it, the Italians did it, the Spanish did it, everyone did it. You deny the enemy access to an area. Number two, you are going to subdue local populace. Now, this can be your own, or it can be a foreign populace. The best example a lot of people point to is going to be the Crusades. When the crusading armies came into the Middle East, they put a ton of castles into the Holy Land. And that was to both control, number one, control the borders, and two, subjugate the populace and have control of the region. And that is a good way to protect the money, protect the resources, protect trade, and protect your men, but also hold garrisons so you can push people out anywhere you wanted. You also see the same thing at home when you need to keep the peasantry in check. You have to put those castles in so that people still pay their taxes, they still work, you can call them up to the militia, and they know who's in charge. And that's why there are always these very tall, domineering structures. People can see it. People know who's in charge. People may not see the face of the lord who's collecting the money, but they definitely know where he lives. And if your neighbor gets dragged over there and he doesn't come out the next morning, bad news for Uncle Tommy. The third reason you're going to have that castle is it is a symbol of authority and governance. Number one example, Tower of London. Number one. And that's the third reason you're going to have that castle is it is a seat of power. You're going to hold the treasury there. You're going to hold court there. You're going to pass judgment. You're going to instill the laws. Everything's there. But with all that combined, it is still a home. So we're going to explore that a little bit and dive in to the basic foundations of what is this castle going to be. When castles are being constructed, there are stages. You will have your early form stages are going to be very simplistic. It is going to be the rudimentary form of a square-ish, very simple tower. Think manor house that is tall, functional, comfortable, lordly, opulent, but strong, defensive, gives you good oversight of the surrounding terrain, and is going to have more function than it is going to have form. But as years go by and you have stability, wealth, and an increase in the population of the surrounding area, you're going to have the time, the manpower, the money to build up that building. So, with Marith in particular, it's been, when I say in the prologue of Book 1, 200 years since the end of the war with the neighboring kingdom to the north, Almuk. So, you've got a little bit of time, and that's 200 years of construction you can have. Building designs have changed, tastes have changed, rulers have changed. So you're gonna have different rulers, you're gonna have different architects, you're gonna have different tastes and trends, and you see this in castles as well. Some castles that were built in the 11th century may have the same core central structure, but additions leading into the 14th and the 15th century will be of a different style with similar, if not the same, materials. So we're going to build from the eastern side of this castle all the way out to the west, and we're only going to be using the stamping methods, giving it a nice little overhead view. And I'm just going to speed through this one because I don't want to necessarily lecture you on how to build a castle, because if you look to history, castles took many, many forms. I simply just want to show the process I've gone through in a very quick form to play around with the idea of making a castle that looks like it has gone through a couple of different renovations, and what I've come up with for the beginning stages of this beginning castle. And maybe at the end, you can take a look at this and see something you like, make a comment, maybe make a criticism. I'm very open to criticism. I love criticism more than I like people clapping and saying, I love it. Anyone can say that. But if you have criticism and it's constructive, absolutely. I love constructive criticism. And when I'm personally making this castle, I tried to kind of build a story on the inside as to why things were built there. So, like the southwest side, at one point, a queen that had been in the early stages, she was a herbalist fanatic. So she wanted to have this greenhouse. It is no longer a greenhouse. It has gone through a couple of different uses, but it's a very nice building. It has large glass windows on the sides of one of the towers that is in there, but it has now been walled up because it wasn't functional. Like I said, people do really nutty things when they have money. We've seen this in real life. It was no different back then. Once I had the central keep kind of in a place where I liked it, I went ahead, I grabbed the gatehouse, threw it over to the side, and said, this is where I kind of know I want the outside of it to be. And the gatehouse itself was only a building with a drawbridge. If you look at gatehouses, I really like the architectural style of 13th century Italian masons. They had this usage of towers that really it encapsulates the idea of imposing fields of fire, which is a wonderful counter siege tactic where you have murder holes. So you can kind of counter the siege in a few different ways. You can draw them in, or you can hold them off. The castle here in Marith does not actually have a moat. It is on a lifted plain or a lifted slope in the middle of the city, and it's going to be using the city to concentrate fields of fire out of the surrounding towers. So it's a kind of a play on urban warfare. So there's a lot of different ways that you could defend the place. A lot of fantasy movies and a lot of fantasy books, anime even, have the idea of the castle city or the fortified city. Everyone is behind the walls. Economically, not very functional. That is a lot of money. That's a lot of stone. That's a lot of manpower. What you can do is you can focus your defensive resources and you can focus your manpower on the most essential areas. You can wall out what you know you must defend, and you can have strong points where you draw the populace back in and you hold there. So you may have this castle, but you can have outside in the city garrisons where people would evacuate to, which is something that is plausible. You could do this. Where I'm going to do the exterior walls is something I found a little bit by accident, because up until this point I had been using the stamp tool, and it works. It had some nice results, but I found out that this pen tool was a lot more flexible, especially when I had these very strange curves in my buildings. And by lining up the pen tool's outside edge, this little purple shaded section, I can get some really, really neat effects by lining up the outside edge with the corners and the sides of placed buildings. Now, I've seen some people make castles and they'll put the buildings and then the wall does not touch the building itself. The issue I find with it personally, and I'm not criticizing it at all, I think they look great. They're fantastic. The contemporaries, when I look at historical record, and you can look at the physical castles from Europe, Middle East, even if you look at cinema, is that the castles themselves, from the inner keep to the outsides, were habitable. You could have just fortified buildings, and the buildings themselves were completely encapsulated in these walls. And to me, this feels a little more realistic. And you can almost kind of get this sense where, especially where you have the curves and the shaping of the building itself seems non-angular, then you get the sense of having to shape to the terrain. So it would explain as to why here on the northern edge it can jut out a little bit and then it has to come back in and go straight east. So you're having to form to the terrain. As for, shaping the terrain to your needs or major geological alterations at the time, yes, there was mining, but not at the scale that we have now. Nowadays, if we wanted to place a foundation, we could bring in heavy-duty equipment and we could flatten an entire area in a couple of days. We can't necessarily do that 12th century, 13th century. If it's fantasy world, you can explain it. Yeah, we brought in a couple of mages and we blasted the entire top of this mountain off and then built a massive castle with the remnants. 100% we could do that. For my purposes, it didn't feel right. So I wanted to keep it as true to historical record and our way of how history had been recorded and how things played out in our world. That is why I've more leaned into historical basis. And I'm going to just kind of blend in the inner keep. I'm going to keep as much of this as I can to bring in that feeling of multiple layers of defense. So even if the outer wall was breached, the inner keep itself is still the strongest point. You have many resources that you can look at. There are, thankfully, a lot of records from both the attacker and the besieged on how siegecraft worked. There are treatises on how to best defend against siegecraft machines. There are treatises on how to best breach a castle wall. You have both sides. It's no different than the modern arms race. As siegecraft was getting better, people were making castles stronger. And once you have the age of cannon, things just got flipped on its head. Thankfully, in my world, no cannons. We just have mages that can shoot fire out of their hands and creatures that can shatter walls with their bare fists. Nothing too scary. But when you finalize what your castle's going to look like, you could also, suppose the phrase would be, habitate the inside courtyard with ancillary buildings. Castles were self-sufficient. You could have your own granaries, you had kitchens, you had garrisons, barracks, treasuries, you had the guest houses, you had stableries, you had any kind of marketable resource that you were focused on would have some sort of a capacity within the castle. Like, let's say your resources are more focused on mining and gold. It would not be beyond any kind of thought that you would have a stockpile at the keep, like an emergency resource of iron, an emergency resource of timbers, something that would be of value to the people you would hold. You would have emergency weapons. You would have armaments. You would have anything that is essential to upholding peace and stability to the region. You would have it here. You may also have the prison. That would probably be the number one reason no one would want to visit. But here we go. This is pretty much what I'm looking at as a basis for what is potentially going to become the castle at Marith. It's going to go through some revisions, but today I wanted to play around and see what I was going to get. Thank you for watching. It has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you guys enjoy this. Have fun, enjoy yourselves, and be safe.
Take a step into my world, my friend. We'll draw the lines where dreams begin. With a map, we will trace the journey's end. Ink-stained hands, let's fly.
If you want to see more of the world as you follow along in this series, consider purchasing the author's book, Hero of Oria, available in print and digital format.
The hills and trees in sketches grow. Come and weave this tapestry with me. How will it all end? We do not know. Let's fly over stains of blackened mountains, hills, and trees. Take an inky swim through rivers, lakes, and streams. Don't care where you've been, and don't care how long, but as long as you're here, come along. Through the valleys where the rivers run, painting tales, looking for an ending. Draw the night and await the morning sun. Together our path leads round the bend. Untraveled roads rarely leave you guessing. Search the skies, your stars are shining. Find your way and see a new horizon. Journeys only end after beginning. I know you can fly over stains of blackened mountains, hills, and trees. Take an inky swim through rivers, lakes, and streams. Don't care where you're going, how long you'll be away. I will be right here and here I'll stay.